Somewhere in your city right now, a government is borrowing money, a central bank is moving gold, a corporation is negotiating an acquisition worth billions of dollars, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, quietly, without fanfare, sits an institution whose name has been attached to the machinery of global finance for over 250 years. We are not talking about a country, we are not talking about a central bank or a technology company or a sovereign wealth fund. We are talking about a family, a single family, that began in a walled Jewish ghetto in 18th century Germany, inside a house so narrow that more than 30 people lived between its walls, under a red shield painted on the front gate. That family is the Rothschilds, and their story is not a conspiracy. It is not a myth. It is one of the most thoroughly documented, historically verified, and genuinely extraordinary stories of financial ambition, family strategy, survival, and transformation that the world has ever produced. Forbes ranked the family's founder among the 20 most influential business people in all of human history. Historians call him the founding father of international finance, and yet, most people alive today know almost nothing about how he actually did it, or what it cost. This is the true story of the Rothschild dynasty, the family that financed wars, built railways, purchased the Suez Canal for the British Empire on a handshake, survived the Nazis, outlasted socialism, and quietly rebuilt itself into a global financial institution that still operates today, across 40 countries and 6 continents. To understand the Rothschilds, you have to understand where they came from, because the place itself explains almost everything. In the 18th century, the Jewish community of Frankfurt was forced by law to live inside a single street called the Judengasse, which translates as the Jewish alley. It was a cramped, walled lane that housed thousands of people in conditions that were, by any measure, brutal. Jews were not permitted to own land outside the Judengasse. They could not walk freely through the city on Sundays or Christian holidays. They were subject to special taxes, simply for existing, and they were barred from most trades and professions, with one significant exception. Jews were permitted to lend money at interest, a practice that Christian law made difficult for Christians themselves, which meant that Jewish merchants became the financial operators of the European world, almost by default. It was into this world that Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born in 1744, one of 8 children, in a house 11 feet wide, above a shop where his father traded goods and exchanged currencies. His parents died of smallpox when he was 11 years old, and relatives arranged for him to begin training as a religious scholar. But Mayer Amschel made a different decision. He persuaded his relatives that business was his calling, and at the age of 13 he was sent to Hanover, where he became an apprentice at the banking firm of Simon Wolf Oppenheimer, one of the most respected financial houses in the German states. Those years in Hanover were the education that no school could have provided. Mayer Amschel learned foreign trade, currency exchange, the valuation of coins, and, perhaps most importantly, the mechanics of trust, in a world where trust between strangers was the only reliable currency of all. He returned to Frankfurt in 1763, set up his own small shop, and began dealing in rare and antique coins. He was brilliant at it, and his reputation for honest dealing spread quickly. Before long, he had attracted the attention of the most important client in the region, Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, later Wilhelm IX, one of the wealthiest rulers in all of Germany. In 1769, Mayer Amschel was formally appointed court agent to Wilhelm IX, an official title that gave him access to the prince's finances, and more importantly, to the prince's connections across Europe. He began managing Wilhelm's investments, moving funds across borders, and collecting commissions on every transaction. And as he grew wealthier and more trusted, he began to understand something that very few people in the 18th century had ever grasped as clearly: money, in and of itself, was not the source of power. The ability to move money across borders faster than anyone else, with people you could completely trust, that was the real source of power. And Mayer Amschel had 10 children, 5 of them sons, who could be deployed across the continent like chess pieces, on a board he had already studied for years. His 5 sons were named Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Karl, and James. And when Mayer Amschel looked at the map of Europe, at its warring kingdoms, its desperate governments, its need for gold and credit, and financial bridges between hostile nations, he saw not a threat, but an opportunity. He placed each son in a different city. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt and to anchor the family's base. Salomon went to Vienna. Nathan went to England, first to Manchester and then to London. Karl went to Naples, and James went to Paris. One family, 5 cities, 5 banking houses, all operating as a coordinated network under a single family code: unity, integrity, and industry. The the Rothschild family motto. Mayer Amschel died in 1812 before he could see the full reach of what he had built, but he had written something into his will that was unlike almost any business document of the era, a formal partnership agreement, the first of its kind in European banking, that bound the five brothers together as a single financial entity, requiring joint decisions, shared profits, and a rule that no brother could enter into a major transaction without the knowledge of the others. He had essentially invented the multinational corporation 2 centuries before the term existed. The world that Mayer Amschel's sons inherited was a world on fire. The French Revolution had overturned every established order in Europe, and Napoleon Bonaparte had turned that revolution into a military empire that was rewriting the borders of the entire continent. For most people, the Napoleonic Wars were a catastrophe, but for the Rothschild brothers, who had the rare ability to move money across enemy lines because their network operated above national politics, the wars were the greatest business opportunity of their generation. Nathan Mayer Rothschild in London emerged as the most commercially brilliant of the five brothers. By 1813, the British government was facing an acute logistical crisis. Wellington's army, fighting Napoleon's forces across Spain and Portugal, needed to be paid in gold coins, which had to be sourced, transported and delivered across some of the most dangerous and contested territory in Europe. The government had tried other banking houses and failed. Nathan Rothschild succeeded by doing what his father had taught him, using the family's European network to source gold from multiple markets simultaneously, smuggle it across French blockades using routes that only the Rothschilds and their couriers knew, and deliver it to Wellington's forces through a chain of trusted agents that stretched from London to the Portuguese border. In 1815 alone, the Rothschilds moved the equivalent of approximately £850 million in today's money in subsidies for Britain and its continental allies. And then came Waterloo. On June 18th, 1815, the battle that would determine the fate of Europe was fought in what is now Belgium. Napoleon's army faced Wellington's British and Prussian coalition. The outcome would decide whether French government bonds would soar or collapse, whether British consuls would surge or sink, and whether the peace that Europe desperately needed would finally arrive. Nathan Rothschild had built a private courier and communications network that was faster than any government system in the world, using fast ships, relay horses, and experienced agents stationed at key channel crossings. His agent was at the battlefield, and when Napoleon was defeated on the evening of June 18th, a Rothschild courier reached Dunkirk, crossed the Channel on a Rothschild vessel, and brought the news to Nathan in London on the night of June 19th, a full day and a half before Wellington's official government messenger arrived. What happened next has become one of the most debated episodes in financial history. According to historian records and the Rothschild archive itself, Nathan did go to the stock exchange on June 20th with the knowledge that Britain had won. Various accounts describe him selling bonds first, which drove prices down, before quietly buying back at the lower prices. Whether this specific manoeuvre happened exactly as described remains debated by historians, including Niall Ferguson, who has studied the Rothschild papers in detail. What is not debated is that Nathan anticipated, correctly, that a lasting peace would push British government bond prices sharply upward, that he bought enormous positions in those bonds in the days and weeks after Waterloo, and that by 1817 he was able to sell them at approximately 40% profit. The historian who reviewed those records called it one of the most audacious moves in the history of finance. By 1818, Nathan had arranged a £5 million loan to the Prussian government. By 1825, his London bank was so powerful that it was able to supply the Bank of England itself with enough gold bullion to avert a national liquidity crisis, meaning that a private Jewish banker from a Frankfurt ghetto was single-handedly preventing the financial collapse of the most powerful empire on earth. His brother James in Paris was simultaneously financing railways across France and managing the sovereign debts of multiple European governments. His brother Salomon in Vienna had become so integral to the Austrian Empire's finances that Metternich himself arranged for all five brothers to be granted the title of Baron by the Emperor in 1822. The five sons of a man who had been born inside a walled Jewish ghetto with no civil rights were now the financial backbone of four of the five most powerful nations in Europe. They had done it through family unity, through a communications network that outpaced governments, through a principle of never seeking excessive profits that kept their relationships with sovereign clients stable and long-lasting, and through a willingness to take carefully calculated risks that smaller, more cautious banks would never have attempted. In the decades after Waterloo, as Europe entered a period of industrial transformation that would reshape the physical and economic landscape of the entire world, the Rothschilds moved with it, not as spectators, but as architects. They became the primary financiers of the railway revolution that was connecting cities, nations and continents for the first time in human history. James de Rothschild in Paris built the Chemin de Fer du Nord, the northern railway line that opened Paris to a broader French population and became a model for rail investment across Europe. The family financed railway networks in France, Austria, Spain, Italy and Brazil, laying the literal tracks along which the modern world would travel. They bankrolled Cecil Rhodes and the development of the British South Africa Company, becoming deeply embedded in the mining industry across southern Africa. In 1873, the French and British branches of the family joined forces to acquire the Spanish government's money-losing Rio Tinto copper mines, restructured the company, and turned it into one of the most profitable mining operations in the world. In 1887, they loaned money to and invested in the De Beers diamond mines in South Africa, becoming the largest shareholders in a company that would come to control the global diamond trade for most of the 20th century. But the single most dramatic demonstration of Rothschild power in the Victorian era came on a single afternoon in November 1875. The Egyptian Khedive, heavily indebted and facing financial ruin, had decided to sell his government's shares in the Suez Canal Company, the canal that connected the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and through which a vast proportion of British imperial trade flowed. The French were interested, other European investors were circling, and the British Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, desperately wanted those shares for Britain, both for their commercial value and for the geopolitical control they represented over the route to India. Parliament was not in session, there was no time to convene it. Disraeli needed £4 million, the equivalent of several billion in today's money, immediately, and he needed it from a single source he could trust completely. He sent a message to his close personal friend Lionel de Rothschild, the head of the London branch of the family. According to historical records at the Rothschild archive, Lionel was in his office at New Court when the message arrived, eating grapes. A government official presented the request and Lionel asked a single question. When? The answer was tomorrow, and Lionel said, yes, on a handshake, with no formal documentation, no parliamentary approval and no collateral beyond the word of the British government. The funds were transferred the next day. By December 1875, Britain had become the largest single shareholder in the Suez Canal Company, owning 44% of its shares. The loan was repaid within 5 months with interest. The Suez Canal remained under British influence until Egypt's President Nasser nationalised it in 1956, and the entire chain of events that shaped British imperial policy in the Middle East and North Africa for the next 80 years had begun with a handshake in a banking office on a London afternoon. By the early 20th century, the Rothschild family had weathered revolutions, wars and the rise and fall of empires, but nothing they had ever faced prepared them for what began in 1933, with the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany. The Nazis made the Rothschilds a central target of their propaganda. The Jewish banking family that had operated at the highest levels of European power for more than a century was exactly the kind of symbol their ideology was built to destroy. When Nazi Germany annexed Austria in March 1938 in what became known as the Anschluss, the Vienna branch of the family was immediately in danger. Baron Louis de Rothschild, the last active director of the family's Austrian bank and one of the most respected financiers in Central Europe, was arrested at Vienna airport by the Gestapo, just days after the annexation. He was held captive in the Hotel Metropole, the same building that had become Gestapo headquarters, for over a year, while the Nazis negotiated what they called a ransom, demanding the family hand over vast financial assets in exchange for his freedom. The sum eventually agreed upon has been estimated at the equivalent of $21 million, believed to be the largest individual ransom payment in history at that time. Louis was released in 1939 and fled to Switzerland, then eventually to the United States. The family's Vienna palaces, grand, centuries-old buildings filled with art collections, tapestries, armour and sculptures accumulated across generations, were seized, looted and eventually destroyed. Tens of thousands of documents and artworks were confiscated. The Rothschild Hospital and a train station they had funded in Vienna were demolished after the war to make way for modern construction. The Austrian branch of the family was erased, not metaphorically, but literally, from the physical landscape of the city they had helped to build. In France, Elizabeth de Rothschild, the wife of Philippe de Rothschild, was arrested by the Nazis and deported to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she died in 1945, the only member of the family to perish in the Holocaust. The Vichy government seized the family's Bordeaux wine estates. The Paris banking house was placed under government control. It was returned to the family at the end of the war, only to suffer another blow in 1982, when the newly elected socialist government of François Mitterrand nationalised the French Rothschild banking business entirely. The family lost their bank for the second time in 40 years. But here is what defines the Rothschild story as something more than simply a tale of wealth and power. Baron David de Rothschild, then 39 years old, made a decision after the 1982 nationalisation that echoed something in the family's oldest DNA. He stayed. He did not leave France. He did not transfer the family's capital elsewhere, and he did not accept that the dynasty was finished. He rebuilt from 3 employees and approximately $1 million in capital, creating a new entity called Rothschild & C Bank, and spent the next 3 decades building it back into a force in international investment banking, leading the league tables in merger and acquisition advisory across the United Kingdom, France and Italy. Today, Rothschild & Company is a global financial advisory and investment firm headquartered in Paris and London, operating across approximately 40 countries with more than 4,000 employees. It advises governments, corporations and institutions on some of the most complex financial transactions in the world. It is, by the standards of today's megabanks, a boutique firm, not a JP Morgan, not a Goldman Sachs, but it is the oldest continuously operating financial dynasty in history. And it is still run by the same family that started it, in a Frankfurt ghetto, 2.5 centuries ago. The legends and conspiracies that surround the Rothschild name are enormous in volume, and almost entirely false in substance. They do not control 80% of the world's wealth. They did not secretly run every war in modern history. The family has been, for over a century, a target of anti-Semitic propaganda that used their real success as a canvas for invented crimes, and serious historians, including Niall Ferguson, who wrote the definitive 2-volume history of the family using its actual archives, have documented this clearly. What the Rothschilds actually did was remarkable enough that it requires no embellishment, and far more interesting than the myths that replaced it. So what can we actually learn from the Rothschilds? The first lesson is one that Mayer Amschel built into the foundation of everything he created, that a network is worth more than an institution. The Rothschilds didn't just build banks, they built relationships such with princes, prime ministers, emperors and presidents that gave those banks access and trust that no amount of capital could have purchased on its own. The second lesson is that information, delivered faster than your competition and acted upon with discipline, is the true engine of financial power, something that Nathan Rothschild understood in 1815, and that every hedge fund and algorithmic trading desk in the world is still trying to replicate today. The third lesson is perhaps the most human one. This was a family born in a place that told them they did not belong to the world, that they would always live behind walls, that they would never own land or hold office or sit in parliament or be received at court. And through 2 centuries of systematic anti-Semitism, persecution, Nazi imprisonment, nationalizations and wars that took everything they had built multiple times over, they kept rebuilding, not because they were immune to what history threw at them, but because they understood in their bones that the family itself was the institution, not the bank, not the building, not the assets. Mayer Amschel Rothschild didn't build an empire. He built a system of trust, information and family that outlasted every empire around it. Tap that subscribe button if you want more documentary stories about the real history of the dynasties and families that shaped the world economy you live in. Drop a comment and tell us which part of this video surprised you the most. This was the story of financial power. Now click to see the family that owns the streets of London.